Wait for all of you to get seated. Can you all hear me? Great. Asad Allah masa'akum bikulli khair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maurice Pomerantz. I'm the Executive Director of the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which is an interdisciplinary center for advanced research, artistic creation, and public outreach. I'm also a professor of classical Arabic literature here at NYU Abu Dhabi. One of the most exciting aspects of my job here at the Institute is planning upcoming events with faculty members from NYUAD and local partners here in the UAE. For those of you who are new to our ongoing lecture series, we offer you a warm welcome and encourage you to follow us. We're proud of our long tradition. It's now 16 years of offering educational, informative lectures by world-renowned experts on a wide variety of topics across the ambit of human knowledge and inquiry. Before we get on with this lecture, I'd like to tell you about some of our upcoming events, which happen here mainly in A6 on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. There's one exception. This Wednesday, we'll have a talk entitled Wisdom from the Ages, Ibn Khaldun and Lessons for a Poly-Crisis World. And that'll take place here on this Wednesday, October 30th at 6 p.m. We're going to invite Tan Sri Azman Mukhtar, who has held and holds numerous high-ranking positions in financial and charitable organizations in Malaysia. He'll be in conversation with the renowned author Tim McIntosh Smith. And they'll guide us through the insights of Ibn Khaldun, an Arab philosopher whose ideas prefigure many features of modern sociology. So you'll learn about things like the circle of equity, which is an interconnected approach to power, economic growth, and social justice. It's an old idea, but one very much on this thoughtful person's mind. Next, on Monday, November 4th, at 6 p.m., we'll invite you to Inside the Body's Future, How Bio-Nano Things Will Change Disease Detection, something very different. This talk will introduce us to the Internet of Bio-Nano Things, a groundbreaking approach to healthcare. In this vision of the future, tiny devices called Bio-Nano Things can detect infections and other health data directly within the body and transmit that information to medical professionals in real time. Wow. Finally, please join us on Wednesday, November 6th at 6 p.m., and that will be in the Blue Theater, not here, in the Arts Center, with Dr. Leonardo Barilaro, who is a pianist and an aerospace engineer known as the Space Pianist. Interesting. He'll share his music compositions that have journeyed to the International Space Station and been streamed back to Earth. He'll also discuss his Astrobeat project, which addresses the growing issue of space debris, or the human-made objects that remain in orbit. So you can register for all of these talks online and invite your friends and share widely. But now, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event entitled Cybersecurity and Ethics. My sole responsibility tonight is to hand the microphone and platform over to my colleague, Dr. Muhammet Ali Bass. Dr. Bass is an associate professor of political science here at NYU Abu Dhabi and has come to us from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. As a scholar of international relations and political methodology, Dr. Bass has written articles on topics such as arms proliferation, regime uncertainty, and even, yes, geoengineering. His applied expertise in unpacking thorny issues will doubtless prove useful in understanding some of the broader implications and repercussions surrounding tonight's what will promise to be a very, hopefully, insightful conversation. Finally, I'd like to specifically thank the United States mission to the UAE, several members here, for their help in organizing this talk with us. Muhammad, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. And it's great to have you all here today with us to talk about cybersecurity and ethics. Technology, of course, in almost every aspect of our lives, right? We have cell phones, we have smart watches. Our homes some of our homes are connected, right? Our washing machines or kitchen or fridges connect to the internet sometimes so that you can remotely start them. Some of you are students, right? So you, for instance, use this technology that we will just use to hear from our expert on cybersecurity, the Zoom capability. It wasn't in our lives until the pandemic, more or less, and it changed our lives and the way that we learn in many different ways, right? The same thing with ChatGPT, that is a thing now in these days, and it affected how we teach our classes, how you learn, how you engage with the materials. So we live in a world, in a way, that involves a lot of technology and a rapid pace of technological innovation and change, right? So we have self-driving cars and taxis now. A lot of things that we didn't have, our older generations or ancestors did not really have to deal with. Of course, it's exciting to live in a world like that, but it comes with a lot of challenges as well. A lot of challenges of different types. And today we will get to hear about two of those areas of challenges. Challenges for governments and the security implications of this rapid technological innovation, the integration of technology in our lives, and what kind of challenges governments face, policymakers, decision makers face when they have so many other vulnerabilities to think about, and how it shapes the intergovernmental relations, the cooperation and conflict dynamics. They changed. So security is one area that we will get to hear today from our experts on the impact of technology and cyberspace, what are the implications. But it's not the only area. At the very basic individual level, also there are many ethical considerations of this much dependence to technology and innovation, introduction of new tools, new technologies like AI, and those unique challenges, that ethical dilemmas, ethical challenges that wait for us in the future as these technologies develop further. So we have two experts today looking at those two distinct areas and challenges. Our first expert, let me introduce them to you briefly, and then again, my role here is to keep the conversation going. I will leave the floor to them, and just like you, I'm looking forward to learning from them. Our first speaker, who's joining us remotely, is James Lewis, who is a Senior Vice President, Pritzker Chair, and the Director of the Technology and Public Policy Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And previously, he was a diplomat for the US Foreign Service and a member of the Senior Executive Service, where he got to negotiate bilateral agreements on transfers of technology, military technology, on regional stability. He helped develop groundbreaking policies on satellite remote sensing and encryption, and he led the first US delegation to the Wassenaar Arrangement Experts Group. He's the author of numerous publications on topics like cybersecurity, innovation, spectrum management, and international strategy. So we are happy, we're lucky to have him with us today and talk about his work and his experiences in these areas. Our second speaker is Mayra Ruiz-McPherson, who is a cyber psychologist who works with organizations on the human-centered aspects of cyber technology. Her work is related to many different topics, including protecting human autonomy, deepening media literacy, improving media literacy, promoting positive media experiences, and designing ethical and facilitated experiences to improve processes and outcomes where humans and machines collaborate. Just like many examples I gave you earlier on, her research is related to those experiences and the ethical dynamics related to them. Previously, she was a senior digital strategist for marketing and advertising technologies with Q-Burst Technologies. So thank you both for being here with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you about your research and your expertise. But let me quickly give you more information about the format of this conversation today. We will start with our experts talking about these two distinct issues that I mentioned, the security implications and also the ethical considerations in the cyber realm. After we hear from them, then I have a set of questions that I will get to ask our participants, and hopefully that will start the conversation. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session. I will open it to questions from the audience, and then we will get to hear from you as well, your questions. Given that we have limited time, just as a reminder, and this is an educational academic talk, the best use of our time and here this talk would be to ask questions to our experts, guests, rather than expressing opinions or making comments on these issues. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you about your specific questions to our guests here. Okay, with that, without further ado, I will leave the floor to our first speaker, Jim. Whenever you're ready, we are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming to tonight's event. I'm sorry, but we had an offsite and everyone at it was infected with COVID, so I'm sparing you. Let me give you sort of a historical perspective on this, which is useful, I think. When the internet was commercialized, and it was in 1995, so it's been less than 30 years, no one expected it to become a battleground, right? But states quickly saw an opportunity for espionage, for influence, for crime. Non-state actors, criminals saw an opportunity for crime. And disinformation became, because of the architecture of our original thinking, disinformation became a common feature of what you see. Let me tell you about the original sins of the internet. We did not think that authentication of identity, authentication of content was a good idea, mainly because of privacy reasons. So you can log on, you can do anything without identifying yourself. There was a debate over this, some people want, and you see in authoritarian regimes, you need to provide a real identity, but there's many ways around that. So the failure to authenticate identity is a crucial failure. The second one was deregulation. The internet came at a time when the US and other advanced economies were deregulating their telecom sector. And that led to a light touch regulation that only created opportunities for people to exploit weak authentication, the very porous nature of the software. So it's been almost 30 years. There were assumptions about the end of sovereignty and the nature of legitimacy, the business model of the internet. And we had a struggle with this. How would we? The internet started out as a US government project. And in 1995, the National Science Foundation said, it's just gotten too big. We can't afford it anymore. They had one guy at a university in California running the internet out of his basement. And they said, we can't do this anymore. And there was an effort to decide, how do we pay for this thing? And the business model that came up that's been really successful is personal data in exchange for services. And so the business model of the internet works against privacy. There's been many efforts to fix that, but they haven't worked out so far this well. And if you look at the European Union, their regulations have killed digital innovation to their economic harm. Ideology shaped the internet's architecture. Fundamental values are now contested, but in 1995, there was thinking that it was the end of history, right? And that we would see the end of conflict. Everyone would become a market democracy. This turned out not to be true. You have larger trends. You have the sort of post-Gutenberg printing press, loss of narrative control, and you have competing narratives in a way that you didn't have before, unexpected. And so hostile actors exploit the vulnerability of the system, the competing narratives. Social media was unexpected in the creation of the original architecture of the internet. No one expected social media. It was a surprise, right? And social media has profound political effects, which is one of the things we can talk about tonight. It erodes legitimacy, it erodes curation, it provides alternate and credible narratives. So if cyberspace is an arena for conflict, we tend to think of conflict of attack and sabotage, espionage, but it's also an arena for conflict over legitimacy and what is a legitimate narrative. Social media has a mass effect. This was unexpected as well. In the old days, there's some good data on this. The FBI tracks the number of people who were in favor of fascism, of Nazism, and they used to. And what they found is before the internet, the number of actual Nazis, Nazi party members was in decline, right? When the internet arrived, the number increased. Now you see what happened. But before the internet, if you were someone who had extreme political views or engaged in some behaviors we find objectionable, like child pornography, you were isolated. You were not respected in your community. You felt like you were by yourself and alone. The internet created virtual communities that allowed these people to see themselves as part of a larger movement. The political effect is profound, and it's one that our solutions, representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, have not yet been able to deal with. There's been a resurgence of authoritarianism. That's not entirely due to the internet, but the internet helps. And so I saw a line, and there was an IMF report recently, and a line that stood out to me was, discontent with state institutions is a fundamental driver of unrest, right? And that is what the internet provides, a megaphone, an amplifier. It reinforces discontent. The area of conflict and the area for opponents to think about is how to exploit that discontent, how to exploit the vulnerability that the internet creates, and how to use new software tools to do it. At the start of all this, there was a debate, should we call it cyberspace, which comes out of a science fiction novel, I think in the early 90s. And some of us thought, oh, there's got to be a better name than cyberspace. We never found it. And so we lost that debate. Now we see a similar debate over the phrase artificial intelligence, right, which was created in the 1950s by a distinguished British scientist. But it's not artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence sounds like Terminator. If we had named it advanced software tools, which is actually what it is, there would be a lot less hysteria and hype around it, because it's an engineer from Google told me it's just Excel on steroids, right? That's a bit of an exaggeration, but we've got this question, is AI different? Is this a fundamental turning point? And the answer is, in the near term, probably not. In the long term, perhaps. We've had a long history of predictions about how this new technology would displace human beings, would replace us, you've got this whole community of doom when it comes to AI. And in the past, automation has been going on for 350 years. Replacing human labor has been going on for 350 years. And you can take a bet. It's either the trend will continue, that new tools come along, people figure out how to use them, they actually create more value, or that they'll somehow be unemployed. I tend to favor the former. I am an optimist when it comes to this. But AI will accelerate existing trends in offense, in cyber offense. It creates new tools. Cyber defense will need to accept that and need to figure out how to use AI to defend itself. It creates the ability to accelerate discontent. So some great percentage of the messages you see in the US election are A, false, and B, created by artificial intelligence. That's a startling change from even 10 years ago. So I'll come to an end. And I had two quotes. One I've been thinking about is John Adams, who was the second president of the United States, wrote, there never was a democracy that did not yet commit suicide. And if that happens to democracies today, the tool, the weapon for that suicide will be in cyberspace, right? On the other hand, there's also very good data that open societies are more successful than closed societies. And so we have this tension here between the political trends, the security risks that cyberspace creates, and the opportunities it will bring. The steps to fix that will be difficult because they go back to these fundamental mistakes we made at the creation of the internet. We'll have to think about how we regulate this space, how we improve the identity of participants. Regulation is not that odd. If you think about the global financial system, it's a good model. You've got the IMF, you've got the World Bank, you have various private groups. We know how to do this, but the difficulty of doing this for cyberspace will challenge our ability to regulate, particularly because if you get regulation wrong, it does economic harm, right? So go back to those fundamental errors in 1995 and ask, now that we see the consequences, great economic growth, but true risk, how do we fix them? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
And for this very interesting, enlightening introduction. And we now get to hear from Mayra about the ethical challenges of these new technological tools that we have. And then we will have the conversation on those two dimensions, two issues.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. Jim set up a lot of things for me, so thank you, Jim. As shared, I will be sharing this very large subject in a very brief window of time, the subject of ethics with the context of AI. And I think this slide was shown earlier accidentally, but I just wanted to dive in before anything just to scrape a teeny surface of the types of headlines that we often see in this regard, and a lot of them, like Jim was saying, regarding job displacement. How many of you have seen headlines like this in your local or national or international news? There are all kinds of headlines that that show the fear of the replacement. Do you have, I'm sure most of you have seen some of these headlines. It's not just the AI, you know, the context of the robots and the Elon Musk types with all these humanoid workforces coming, and I think Amazon has enlisted a bunch of humanoids in their warehouses, and this trend is growing. And so we can agree or disagree on why or how these things cause fear. I'm not here to assign value to those things. I'm just sharing that it's happening. These are trends in the AI ethics space. And then, of course, again, with these job displacement contextual conversations, we have some of these leaders in the tech space suggesting that openly that yes, jobs will go to AI. How many or what, you know, when or how this will happen and how disruptive or not. But the creators of these very platforms are openly suggesting these types of ideas where, you know, at some point, and these are not my words, I'm just the messenger, you know, economies and workforces will have to, you know, share a certain percentage of some kind of equalized income or universal basic income. You know, ethical questions that come to mind is who, if such a thing were to happen, for example, where is that coming from, those monies, and who gets what? Like if, you know, I have 3 or 4 degrees and the person down the street has no degrees, but we're going to get the same amount. And so if you think of industry implications aside and just look at the livelihood and the human element, right? Those are some of the flavors of ethical discussion and context that are very current. And for some of you that might be familiar with the whole Hollywood strike, but this strike is not novel. I mean, there's many strikes happening regarding AI. And this one in particular, I'm not sure how familiar anybody was with this particular strike, but the Hollywood actors, the reason they were upset is because not only were the scripts, these Hollywood executives wanting to use ChatGPT and those types of AI assistants to do the script and the screenwriting, but they also want to use AI to duplicate the actors so that, you know, basically they can clone the voice, clone the figures, you know, but it's their human body and their human talent. And so, again, these are just terrains that we can argue both sides of the fence, but they are happening. And this is very natural for technology to disrupt society in such forms. So I'm just highlighting some examples in the AI ethics arena as of now. And here's another example where this woman who was on TikTok, and she's just a regular person. She's not an influencer, she's just a regular person. A company used AI to create a deep fake of her and then use her for their brand launch and all their product campaigns without permission, contacting her. And she was very upset about this, but they did it very easily without consulting her, compensating her. And so, again, these are just not even, we could be here all night coming up with examples, but I just want to whet your palate on what we're talking about. Because often when you hear ethics, right, it's like, ugh, ethics. But these are very viable scenarios that not only impact us individually, but holistically across immediate communities, society, and globally in varying levels. And of course, our friend Sam Altman. I'm not even going to say who he is. I think everybody might know who he is by now. Here's another AI frontier developer. You know, for all the excitement, and rightly so, some of these technologies are extreme. Who hasn't used an AI assistant here yet? Okay. So, having used it, you see how exciting and innovative and promising these technologies are. But, you know, so most of the time, we hear about that. Once in a while, they'll let out that you know, they recognize there's something different here, right? There's something different, and often they express some measure of fear, of concern for society at large. Yet and still, we press forward without much regulation and much ethical guidelines for the sake of competition and being the first to develop whatever tool or platform. And so, again, ethical context that we're seeing literally unfold every single day. So that brings us to me. And what I want to share with you about myself is not necessarily my background per se, but that I appreciate being introduced to you as an expert. But I don't see myself as an expert so much as I see myself as a quilter. And what I mean by that is, when you quilt something, you're literally stitching scraps together to make something more meaningful. The little pieces come together in a wonderful tapestry of aesthetic symbology and information. And so to that end, you know, titles all day, whatever they may mean to you. But I spend my days, I was bringing these over here on the flight, and they got really messed up in the baggage claim, so forgive me. But, you know, when we talk about ethics, it's not a disassociated topic from practical, everyday business and human life. So these are just some articles that I just want to share a few headlines with you to show you the diversity of how ethics impacts so many facets of day-to-day life, right? So here was an article. I'm sorry, it's all torn up. AI assistants are also office tattletales. So basically what they're saying is in the workforce, all those AI assistants that are used at the job and that now maybe employers require the employees to use, they're also reporting everything the employee does and telling the supervisor, basically tattletaling on what you're doing or not doing and how long it takes and all that good stuff. And so there's ethical implications in the workforce environment regarding privacy and so on. In the US, huge, huge challenges for not only privacy online for everyone, but in particular for youth, right? So there's all kinds of attempts to regulate these technology platforms that often refuse regulation. Internationally, in France, they're using AI for policing, a whole article on that. I mean, it just goes on every single day. How many of you bump into these things? I mean, the focus is the tools and the technology, but indirectly, we are discussing and being confronted with massive ethical challenges. Here, Google and AI are constantly making it difficult for you to opt out of you giving them all your information, even though in the US, there's regulation that says they have to offer users the ability to opt out. So what do? They agree to do it because it's the law, but they make it as difficult as possible. You can't even find the buttons or the process to do it. So technically they're doing it. Technically they're abiding by the law, but they're making it very difficult. And this is just for privacy. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but social media is not necessarily heavily, they haven't agreed on regulation in the US. So we're still stuck on privacy and social media regulation, and they can't get it together. So it's very challenging to think about AI ethics in those contexts as well. One more. ChatGPT. The large language models that were used to train it. Apparently they, as you might be aware, they took a bunch of content from all over, the whole internet, they sucked it up and everything else, which included like zillions and zillions of articles from the New York Times. So the New York Times is suing them for copyright. What happens with this case is going to have massive implications in the AI ethics community, because will copyright exist the way we know it, and how to, based on the outcomes of this case? And if you were to read this article, there's legal argument very strong for both sides of the, yes, they infringed copyright, and no, they didn't. And so really the conclusion of this particular article says it's not even governed by the law. It's going to be what lawyer tells the better narrative, because both sides have incredible weight in their arguments. Anyway, so you can see that, this subject is massive, and every single day I'm clipping headlines and magazine articles and scholarly research and stuff to bring you the kinds of ideas that I'm about to present to you tonight. I'm often the messenger. I'm just sort of sewing the narrative together and presenting it, because I find that the mainstream news and stuff, they don't often highlight this subject in the way that I hope you'll find I've shared it with you tonight. So, when we speak of ethics, I just shared with you, and so did Jim. He was, I think, speaking to the security and vulnerabilities that AI kind of presents us with, and we started off with some of the job displacement and stuff. But there's others that aren't as frequently discussed, and one of them that I want to point out to you is the autonomy one right here, the fourth one down. What is meant by autonomy? Choice, basically, choice. Why is this important? Because, you know, when you have the algorithms curating content and options for us, and we don't have to choose, they choose for us. There's a convenience in that. But over time, it erodes our sense of autonomy, at least from a psychological perspective. And so when I was on the plane coming here, actually before I got on the plane, I bought this book to read it. I'm not sure if anybody's read it. It's called Co-Intelligence. Anybody read it? Well, as soon as I saw the title, and again, I'm speaking to this point of autonomy, I was struck by the title. I'll tell you why. I started reading it on the plane, and I could hear the pilot letting us know how long the flight would be and the weather and make sure we had the seatbelts and all that stuff. And I imagined that he was joined in the cockpit by a co-pilot, right? Joint, right? So think about those, the pilot and the co-pilot. They're both working together, right? They're coing. And when I looked up the definition of co-pilot, it said that this job does pre-flight stuff that the pilot doesn't do. It's like he's prepping, and the pilot shows up, and then they're both kind of doing their thing. Well, so the co-part is actually accurate, co-intelligence, when we think of our relationship with artificial intelligence and AI-enabled technologies. But it's incomplete. Can any of you guess at why I might suggest that? I mean, I think it's a start in the right direction to describe our growing interplay with these technologies, but can you think of why maybe it might be insufficient, perhaps? Yes?
Leader that actually leads might be that at a certain stage might
Yes.
be taken over.
Actually, that's a huge, well, first of all, thank you. That's a huge concern, you know. Again, AI ethics is, we want to make sure, as you're saying, that we are the leader, right? And so, yes, that is right and that is relevant. So we're getting warmer. I'll tell you, thank you for sharing that, because that's really relevant to our topic tonight. You'll see more of that. So here's why. Because if you have a pilot and a co-pilot, and think of any situation that you have a co, right? Collaboration, cooperation, coalescing, because this is being marketed to all of you, right? Co-intelligence. And this is not to take away from this author. This is a great book. But as a cyber psychologist, what I think about is it's so much more than co. Because the co-pilot and the pilot are working in tandem and they're supporting each other. But they're not sharing their cognitive loads together. I mean, they have their to-do list and you click those buttons. And so the togetherness piece is accurate. But it's a different type of thinking that we're talking about. And often the emphasis is on the technology, right? Oh, the technology can't do that. Oh, the technology, oh, don't be ridiculous. It can't do this or that. I'm not focused on the technology. I'm not innovating. I'm not a platform CEO. I'm focused on all of you. It's not about what the technology can or can't do. I leave that to the developers and the businesses and the industry sector. It's what the technology makes us feel. It's what the technology makes us experience. It's how the technology changes us, improves us, exacerbates our challenges. That's my focus. So these are some of the ideas, again, that I'm constantly stitching, because as part of my role, I think, in these kinds of talks and helping with AI literacy is to helping audiences and people understand that there's far more robust and textured contexts that are often not as readily available as the industry side of AI. So I think, hopefully, you're getting a sense that we are just scraping a teensy pinch of a very, very large and robust domain. There's no way that, you know, we're going to do too deep of a dive. But, you know, some of the arguments that people make are, we've been here before. And yes, we've been here many, many times. How many of you were aware that when X-rays first came out, radiology, they used to have them in the stores in the 1800s, and you could stick your hands into the X-ray. You could pay to have your hands X-rayed. The X-ray would come out, and people would literally faint. They had never seen bones. Or when the, you know, much later. This is one that always gets referenced, are calculators. How many of you have heard of that example? Oh, the math teachers thought they would lose their job when the calculators came out, right? And then, of course, now we've upgraded from calculators to ChatGPT. So there's a lot of arguments here, and I'm not going to go down these rabbit holes. I want to acknowledge that we've been here 1,000 times and then some, and we're going to continue on these paths. But there is something intimately different about these technologies that are unlike our previous technological innovations. And so Jim was saying earlier, and I'm going to paraphrase, and Jim, jump in if you're out there, that, you know, to have optimism about this stuff, and I agree, okay? But he referenced automation and how automation, you know, automated a lot of things, and then eventually the workforce adjusted and, you know, evolved and iterated, and that's fine, sure. But AI is not only about automation, it's autonomous. If you don't know the difference, autonomous technologies are literally given birth to, as they're designed, to not require human intervention. The calculator, you can turn that off, right? But autonomous technologies, they learn and adapt with intentionally, that's how they're built, with little to no human intervention. Last I checked, calculators don't behave like that. And so these contexts are so important for all of us to understand when they're brought up, right? To know and understand the difference between the two. So, here are a pair of glasses. I want you to pretend that you're going to be a cyber psychologist, just like me. And I want you to see what I see. Here are my glasses. And I want you to see what I see so that we can start learning to read between the AI ethics lines when you hear things and learn things. So here we go. Here is a quote, actually two quotes from Sam Altman when he was describing AI, right? So take a moment to read, right? Let me get my glasses while you read those quotes. As you can see that I emphasize on this side superintelligence. And over here, I'm emphasizing that he's saying generally these technologies are smarter than humans, right? And I think we're mostly familiar with this version or iteration or understanding of AI, human, right? Okay, so putting on our glasses. So instantly, I start highlighting certain buzzwords and phrases, right? Here we see successfully the most important, scary human history, ensure, and benefits all humanity. I don't know that, you know, we can argue a lot of these points, but let's be succinct tonight and just highlight a few of the concerns from wearing my glasses, right? So successfully, you know, things I think about is who gets to define success? In what context? Is it OpenAI? Over here, ensure. What practices are in place to ensure something is smarter than humans and something that doesn't technically have an off button? And what I mean by that is autonomous technologies. benefits all of humanity. Such an outcome assumes a measure of control. We always assume that we'll be in control. In fact, that's like a huge assumption for AI. The humans are in control, as you were mentioning. We're in control. But it's an assumption. There's no guarantee. I'm not trying to scare. I'm being honest, and I'm two sides of the fence, right? So again, when you kind of look at this stuff, you have to think about, there are no guarantees. This control issue is a huge AI ethics risk. Google DeepMind wrote an entire paper on just that alone, on those types of risks, like that because we assume that we'll always be in control, but what happens when they pull the plug and it's still doing its thing? These are risks. I don't know. But again, what I'm trying to show here is context, right? When these glossy marketing terms and stuff that are being fed to us, just to rethink and take a moment to really ponder what's being said and the implications of some of these intended technologies as they impact us socially and culturally, economically, geopolitically, and also our humanity. So, I wanted to point out that in the arena of artificial intelligence, which is why I have that GPS market, which is, we're talking about that tonight. Artificial intelligence, this is a graphic from the Cognitive Science Society, and this is their graphic to show you all the things all the domains, all the fields of study that are part of this technology development, aspiration, direction. But often, how often do you hear about, we hear about maybe some education and maybe a lot of neuroscience, obviously linguistics for the large language model, but we don't often hear, right, these sides of that recipe, right? It's many ingredients that are related, and these are the ones that are often not discussed as prevalent, or if they are brought up, sometimes just not as visibly, right? So we have here the study of mind and behavior, psychology, the study of reality, knowledge, and value, philosophy, and of course, anthropology. So it's all of these things together, but when we hear the news and we read those headlines, 9 times out of 10, it's industry, right? The industry emphasis. And so I'm just augmenting that education with some of these other arenas that are so important and equally important. And so from a psychology point of view, you're wondering, well, why am I talking about philosophy? Actually, philosophy is part of this whole ingredient recipe, but why am I singling it out? Because since we're talking about ethics, I can't not bring it up. Ethics is a child of philosophy. Jim was talking about politics, right? Because all of these seeds together give birth to the domain of philosophy, right? So, we might hear about this all day long in each of our countries, but it really is a stem of philosophical life. The psychology was born from philosophy. So it's impossible for me to be up here to talk to you about cyberpsychology without acknowledging human philosophical life. And why do we care? Why do I highlight? Well, it's very, very important. Because in the arena of ethics, the core of ethics is morality, right? There's huge definitions, and we don't have time for that, but at the crux is ideally what is right or wrong, or how do we face moral challenges in our day-to-day Homo sapien world, right? And so in the context of technology, I want to point out, okay, that I was looking up to put this together, more than 2 billion species on the planet right now, and that fluctuates. 200 primates, of which we are one. But for some reason, we as a species, distinctively, we are biological beings, and so we have biological processes. Inescapably so, we all have DNA, we all have chromosomes, okay? But as you can see here, the plant's bowing to the sun. Sometimes the birds fly south for the winter. But human life, beautifully, is not limited to the chemical codes in our DNA, okay? I'm making a point by sharing all this, so stay with me. So here are ant molehills. This is what they put together for how they live. These are their homes or their shelters. Of course, we might have seen some of these pictures. Might be familiar with wildlife where bears just, plop in any old cave. But we are not governed. We are not limited by our chromosomes. And we go out of our way. Have you ever seen dogs build palaces and beautiful architecture, orchestra, music? We, as a species, truly go out of our way to exercise our innate creativity. In tremendous, magnificent ways. And it just keeps going, and we just keep creating and going and creating. And so much so that, as Jim was saying in the 1950s, the whole AI thing, it was born from the idea that perhaps processing power could be improved, that throughput could be made more efficient. If the technology at the time, maybe it could behave like the spinal cord and the human brain. It was a correlation, an inspiration to model technology with our nervous system, which is governed by the human brain. And so that inspiration, decades ago, has given life to a whole new era of neurocomputational capability, which AI is part of that. Imagine that. Imagine that. We've done that. We're doing that. And so as we continue on this journey and this adventure of neurocomputational creativity and advancement, industry, in parallel to these innovations, is positioning this as quote unquote better. Have you heard that? Better, right? Better, or smarter, or super intelligent. We saw the quotes. And so I looked up the definition of better, right? Just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And if you go through it, it continuously juxtaposes two things in contrast and assigning value to one better than the other in many different ways, right? Higher quality, greater, higher standard, superior, finer, surpass, and so on, exceed. And that's how these technologies are positioned. And so when we look at these types of quotes, and he's not alone, there's, this is the mantra that's out there. What is being suggested is this, right? Something like this, where we have Albert Einstein, kind of a smart guy, chicken, and most of us probably here, right? And so this is, intelligence, but super intelligence might look like this. I mean, this is what we're saying, right? I mean, this is what we're being told. This is what we're being told, what we see, what we hear, what we experience, right? And so what are the implications of this? See, like, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm not assigning value judgments. I'm just pointing out how does that impact us, right? And so, the reason that this better context is a challenge, especially in job displacement, is because we are biological, we are not mechanical, and so we have a linear type of projection, but technology is not linear. You see that? And so, understandably so, industry may favor some of these solutions. And so it's important for workforces and us as societies to recognize why the advantage is for the AI and how to retrain and upskill ourselves so that we can basically better compete with this super intelligent being. And so as I close, I want you to know that these AI technologies have been around for a while. They're iterating. Who knows how they'll improve or expand over time. But what I will say is that they touch almost every facet of human life and scholarly domain. And some at varying degrees more than others. But there's very little corner of human life where these can't be helpful or aren't already being used in some way, shape, or form. And that's kind of an impressive reality check. And I can't imagine that it won't keep growing and expanding. It'll be very interesting to see how this story continues to unfold. Lastly, I pulled this diagram out of a industry-leading strategy, a very high-end business strategy for digital business, Gartner. I don't know if some of you have heard of Gartner or not, but this chart is their visual data answer to how does a business, a digital business, get started with AI in their operations, okay? And so they've given here a whole assessment of you want to bring AI into your warehouse or your operations, customer service, any facet of your business. This graphic would help an entrepreneur, a C-suite shareholder, stakeholder person, kind of get an idea of all the pieces that this technology could or would touch and how to approach their business and their strategy with AI in mind. And so take a moment to look at this. And then now I want you to see that out of all the points, only two gently touch the human side of this coin, right? And so these are two big topics we don't have time for, but I want to point, the point that I want to make is that the human aspect of this AI integration in business, I think we're just getting started. You can see here, leveraging smart robots to augment humans. The emphasis being leveraging the smart robots, not the humans. You see what I'm saying? The culture, we have an opportunity to be innovative with our own human resource, and we need to better understand these dynamics so that, from an AI ethics stance with regards to workforce preparedness and job displacement, that we could be mindful that we really have a lot of, we really need a lot of attention in this domain of human livelihood. And so my goal tonight, I hope, is that I've helped identify where we can better balance the business value with human flourishing, right? They can both be together, and there's plenty of opportunity to improve in that AI ethics space in this regard. That's it. That's it for now.
Thank you, Mayra, for this detailed overview of the ethical challenges related to AI and cyberspace, cyber technology. So in the remaining time, I would like to start with a couple of questions. First to you, Jim, if you don't mind, just to get the conversation going, and then we will open the floor for questions from the audience as well. So Jim, my first question is more on the definitional, conceptual side. So just to try to understand what makes cybersecurity different from other security issue areas. You had experience during your career. You participated in arms control negotiations, conventional arms control, many different security areas that you participated. So what are the challenges that you talked about? How are they different from those more conventional areas for state competition and cooperation? Is it the relevant actors? Is it the type of competition? Is it the level of uncertainty? Is it the potential for arms races and things like that, or the lack thereof? How should we understand that distinction between the cybersecurity realm and the more conventional ways of interstate cooperation and competition?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. And the first thing to think about is that the old line was there are no borders in cyberspace. There are borders, right? And they're easily defined. What they're not easily done is they're not easily defended, right? And so what we have is a situation where if you translated this into any other sphere, if Russian airplanes overflew the United States every day, people would have fits, right? If there were intrusions by Iran into Florida and Pennsylvania by Iranian special forces, people would have fits. It would be close to something leading up to war. But these things happen routinely in cyberspace, and we don't really know how to respond. Some of that is there's been an effort to apply norms, right? That I was involved in the UN norms negotiation, and the norms are routinely ignored, norms of responsible state behavior. The second is the hope that somehow international law would apply. By the way, if you ask anybody, they always say, all my actions are consistent with international law. So it's not that useful a guide, because no one ever says, yeah, you're right, you caught me, I'm committing a crime. It's interesting to see that it's not a useful shield to say, if only they followed international law. This gets back to this control of the narrative. And so in the 90s, you had this belief that the world was coming to a consensus on how nations should operate. That consensus is broken down. And when there is no consensus, there's no consensus on norms, there's no consensus on rules. And there's a reluctance to acknowledge that, right? And so the second problem we have, the first problem is easily penetrated borders. Easy to define, it's all based on physical hardware, easily penetrated borders. Attribution is not a problem for major powers, so we know who's doing it. What we don't have, and this is the second problem, is we don't have a defined set of responses. If you overfly the United States, there's a good chance you'd be shot down, or at least warned off. If you penetrate the networks, nothing happens. And so we've failed to develop the tools, the laws, the regulations that apply to this new space. What is the appropriate response? I think it's part of a larger pattern to your question. When I look at, I don't know if you saw in the papers, but last week we had 3 individuals in Britain arrested for committing sabotage at the behest of the Russian government, right? That's not a good sign. We've had assassinations in Berlin and in the UK. There's a general disregard for the rules. And one of the questions, to your point, is in the past, if people did things, countries knew how to respond. And we don't know how to respond in this new environment. We don't know what would be the appropriate response. Sending people, the US loves sanctions, we all know that. But there's so many sanctions on the principal bad actors, from our perspective, bad actors, on Iran, Russia, and North Korea. There's so many sanctions that they just shrug off another sanction. So we have poorly defined the space in which international law applies, and we have not defined the potential responses. So of course, If someone steals a cookie and they're not punished, they'll steal another cookie. And that's what we see. No definition of boundaries, no strategy for how to respond.
Would you say that it is still the focus should be on states as the main actors, or when it comes to the cyberspace, non-state actors, extremist groups, terrorist organizations, are they larger concerns for us, for decision makers, or is it similar to other areas of use of force in general?
Also a great question, and one I meant to touch on in my remarks, but we have two sources of turmoil. The first is this larger social turmoil that you've heard about, that people are enabled, empowered by the technology in ways that leads to political turmoil, social unrest. The green revolutions are, of course, a classic example, but there are others as well. The disputes in the United States engendered by internet activities. So there's a social level of discontent, but in terms of the most damaging effects, it's still the monopoly of states. And you hear this all the time, oh, well, a corporation is as powerful as a state. Not really. I asked one of these big corporations once, you say you're as powerful as a state. How many nuclear submarines and satellites do you have? We know the answer. So it's the ability of states to use the new technologies to gain coercive effect that is the greatest threat. If the four countries the US usually blames stopped doing malicious cyber activity, the number of criminal acts would decline by about 80%, right? So states are the most powerful, the most dangerous. There is this broader question, and we heard in the previous discussion, there's the broader question of discontent and how political institutions need to evolve to take into account the new technologies and the spaces they have created. But for me, if the states are the prime, we've heard about cyber, I should, as a footnote, we've heard about cyber terrorism for a long time. It's never happened. So focus on states for your primary source of security risk.
Thank you so much for these insights. I think I have time for one quick question to both of our speakers about solutions to these challenges. Where should we look at? Do we look at domestic solutions? Do we look at international attempts to solve these challenges for ethical issues as well as the security challenges? We have a variety of states in the international system with different regime types, different political structures, different legal systems. So if there exist solutions to these problems, are they at the domestic state level within each state? Or should we think about international treaties, international law as an alternative, institutional solutions as an alternative to these ethical challenges as well as the security ones? So maybe we can start with you, Mayra.
Well, it's a great question. I was reviewing some of the AI ethical guidelines on the United Nations website and reading all their reports and policies for 2023, 2024. And they collected, I think they worked with 800 esteemed ethical types all over the world. And those individuals worked with even more. And together they came up with this tremendous, tremendous body of ethical work. But 2 points struck out to me, and I don't know that I have an answer, but I have this I can share. Incredible body of work, but how does that translate or trickle down to practical day-to-day or different country or governance? And in some areas, policy discussions are very challenging and not moving forward, and there's partisanship and all that. So I'm not sure how we get these wonderful and well-intended concepts like to trickle down to practical day-to-day scenarios. But one of the senior most people in this program that put together this United Nations ethical guidelines for intended for the world, to benchmark off and use as the North Star. she specifically said, word for word, that that at the crux of any ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence are human rights and freedoms. And so I'm not sure that I can give you a clean-cut answer, but what I will say is that if that is the case, that she's spearheading on behalf of all of these people, like in conclusion, no matter how detailed the document is, that at the end of the day, what's most important in AI ethics, word for word, she said, are the preservation of human rights. Well, I think the irony of that is that these technologies are causing a lot of idea shift and change, as technology does tend to do in society, for what exactly does it mean to, if the crux of AI ethics for the world is based on the protection of human rights, it's not just generic rights, it's human rights. These technologies make us question what it is to be human, right? Because what we're saying is, can something that has no physical biological body and no sexuality, can it be intelligent? And I don't know what the answer is, but whatever the answer is, I think that's incredible context for AI ethics for the world. You have to kind of revisit the implications of how these technologies are forcing us to think about what it means to be human, so that we can redefine or re-update what human rights are, so that then, if that's the crux of the AI ethics for the whole world, I just think some of that context might need to be updated.
Thank you, Mayra. And Jim, very quickly, I think from your talk, I got the sense that you're a bit more skeptical of international solutions, but correct me if I'm wrong. What is your take on this?
So I worked at the UN and quit a few years ago because I was sitting on the podium behind the chairman of one of these groups that discusses norms and responsible behavior. And a thought popped into my head. I wonder if this is how the people who negotiated the Kellogg-Briand Pact felt. Kellogg-Briand was, of course, the 1925 convention that outlawed war. Didn't work so well. One thing we want to think about is that this new technology is like the printing press. It's like movable type. And when Gutenberg brought movable type to Europe, it created political turmoil. And it took 300 years to figure out what are the new political institutions that can deal with this technology. And so we're just at the start of this. I do tend to think of the Melian dialogue a lot. The Melian dialogue, as you all know, says, great powers do what they want, little powers suffer the rest, right? There's some truth to that. The post-1945 order that we came up with as a globe addressed that by emphasizing human rights, by emphasizing a balance between individual rights and sovereignty. And we're reconsidering that post-1945 order. It doesn't work. So the question, perhaps, I'd leave for the group is, are we in the 1930s when you had powerful authoritarian states pushing back and challenging the existing order, reshaping the world in their interest? Or are we in the 1960s when opposing powers, frightened perhaps by nuclear weapons, were able to sit down and say, let's negotiate understanding, let's negotiate arms control, let's do things to limit risk? Right now, I'd say it's too early to tell, but it'd be great if the international rules actually worked. Maybe the task is, how do we make them more effective?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. This is very helpful. And now I think it's